When most people think about nonprofit fundraising, they tend to think about the same things, donations and grants. But there are many different ways nonprofits can raise funds and bring in revenue. And it's important to understand all of them so that you can identify which methods will be the best fit for your organization's unique model and programs. So in this video, I'm going to share 5 of the common ways nonprofits can generate income. Welcome back to my channel. I'm Amber Melanie Smith. I'm a nonprofit founder and executive director who also makes these videos here on YouTube to help others on their journey to make a social impact, whether that is through starting a nonprofit or a social enterprise or socially conscious business, or just getting out there and volunteering and leading positive change in your community. As always, I hope that you find this video useful and helpful. Don't forget to give it a like and subscribe to my channel for more content like this. I also have a website, foundertofulltime.com, where I offer some nonprofit trainings and resources if starting a nonprofit is the path that you're going down. Okay, so let's get into these 5 methods that nonprofits can use to bring in money. And as I'm going through these, I really want you to be thinking about what makes your organization's situation unique? What are some of its strengths? What assets do you have in your community that could play a role in helping you fundraise? What are some of the unique programs, or do you have a unique model that could be conducive to designing a special sustainable fundraising practice for your organization? Keep all of those things in mind as we go through these. And if it's helpful, you can think of this as, what does your organization do better than anyone else? Are you really skilled at mobilizing volunteers? Are you really good at creating compelling, emotional stories and social media content? Are you in a situation where you have access to an affordable storefront where you might sell items? So just be kind of inventorying these strengths and assets as we go. So the first method nonprofits can use to raise money is one of the most commonly known ones, and that is individual donations. But I'm also talking about donations that are small and large. So you got your $5 gifts or your $5,000 or $5 million gifts. And then we have one-time individual donations and recurring donations. Maybe you have folks who are willing to and are donating every month or every quarter. That would be recurring donation. So these donations are, of course, financial gifts of any size. And in this case, I'm specifically talking about from individual people, not businesses or grants, but specifically from individuals. While a lot of people assume grants make up a large portion of contributions to nonprofits, it's actually more likely to be individual donations. Individual donations make up about 70 to 75% of the charitable contributions coming into nonprofits in the United States each year. So that really underscores the importance of having an individual donor program, one with specific goals and messaging to attract people to donate to your cause, and especially getting people to agree to become recurring donors, because being able to count on donations every single month is so helpful for planning and projecting your future financial capacity. One thing that I hear from nonprofits a lot is that it's very daunting to start up an individual donor program if you don't already have one or some experience with one already. So I have another video that I can share that talks more about in depth how to do this from scratch. So you can check that out. It's called How Do You Even Begin Raising Money? The second type of income source I want to talk about for nonprofits is grants, but there are many different types of grants. You've got your private grants, you've got your corporate grants, you've got your government grants, you've got your family foundation grants. There's so many different types, and there's nuances and ways you would find and locate and apply for each different type of one of them. Now, to get our definition straight, grants are, of course, financial contributions made specifically by a grant-making organization, and that could include any of the ones that I mentioned just now, your family foundations, local, state, or federal governments, etc. And I was alluding to this before when talking about some of the most common types of contributions for nonprofits and the perception that grants are a big part of nonprofit funding. That's not actually true. Within the pool of charitable contributions, grants are only making up about 16% for nonprofits in the United States. If you're looking for more detail on each of the different types of grants and grant-making organizations that I mentioned, as well as some information on how to find each of these types of grants and some of the nuances with applying for each type, check out my other video called 6 Types of Grant Makers. Actually, I'm sorry, 6 Types of Grants for Nonprofits, but you get the idea, and how to find them. Now, the third type of income for nonprofits that I'm going to talk about is probably my favorite, if you can have a favorite type of nonprofit income, and it is earned income. Now, earned income is money that nonprofits can raise through the sale of goods or services. Yes, nonprofits can sell goods or services. This is something that is very misunderstood. Most people that I hear from in the general public assume nonprofits have to rely solely on donations or grants to get by, when in fact, if done correctly, they can use the earned income method to supplement those other revenue sources. The catch is that the process by which you sell your goods or services and the goods or the services themselves must align with your organization's mission very directly. The act of selling those things has to further your organization's public serving mission. I'll explain a little bit more what I mean about that. But when I'm talking about this, I'm talking about things like program fees. So let's say there's a nonprofit theater and you want to buy a ticket that is a sale of a good or a service. You're buying a ticket to their show, and the nonprofit is going to use the money from the ticket sales to further its mission of spreading the love of the arts and of the theater. So it is directly aligned with its mission as one example. So program fees, fees for service, or in some cases even contracts with a government entity. Now, despite the misconceptions I talked about earlier, earned income makes up almost half of all nonprofit revenue in the USA. And if you're sitting there scratching your head and doing the math, because I previously said 70% for individual donations and 16% for grants, I was talking about those being a portion of charitable contributions, meaning gifts that are tax deductible. But earned income is not a donation. It is the sale. There's an exchange of goods or services. So this is not considered a tax deductible donation. When someone gives your nonprofit money through an earned income model, it is not a donation, it's a sale. So a couple of things that are important to know about earned income that I alluded to a little bit before. You can't just sell anything. You can't just randomly sell t-shirts that have nothing to do with your mission. It has to be program fees, fees for service, or contracts that further your actual mission. So I have another video with lots of examples of this at work called 15 Earned Income Ideas that you can check out to really wrap your brain around how this works. But in essence, think of it as the theater example that I shared with you, or sometimes Red Cross will charge a fee for training people in CPR, but the act of training people in CPR furthers their public serving mission. They're simply charging a fee to the public for that service. So I hope that helps you think about this a little bit more. But when you're thinking about these models, thinking about what are those unique assets and things that your organization does really well or has access to that might help you develop an earned income idea. Another thing to consider is that at least in the United States, the IRS doesn't really want you to generate all of your revenue as a nonprofit through an earned income strategy. Otherwise, you're too much like a private business and would be competing with the business sector. So the IRS is going to want you to demonstrate that still at least a portion of your revenue as a nonprofit is coming in through those tax-deductible charitable contributions or grants. The fourth type of income strategy I'm going to talk about for nonprofits is sponsorships. So a sponsorship is a little different than a donation, and this is why. A sponsorship is when a person, business, or organization is offering support usually for a specific event, program, or it could be in some cases for the organization overall. But they are expecting something in return for that support. It could be recognition, it could be some kind of special access to something you're doing. But there are a lot of nuances with sponsorships. There's nuances for everything, as you can tell, that you really need to be aware of to launch an effective sponsorship strategy. For example, because the entity is receiving something of value in return for their support to your organization, they cannot count their entire contribution to your organization as a tax-deductible gift. Instead, they will have to subtract the market value of whatever they received in return from the total of what they gave you, and only the remainder is tax-deductible. If you're looking for some tips on how to actually find and ask for corporate sponsorships, have no fear, another YouTube video is here. I have one called How to Get Corporate Sponsorships, and I hope that you check that out. And the fifth and final common income model for nonprofits that I'm going to talk about is fundraising events. Fundraising events are, of course, events that take place within a specific finite amount of time that invite your supporters and followers to come participate in some kind of activity or gathering. There are so many different types of events. You've got your 5Ks, you've got your fancy dinners and your galas, you've got your virtual trivia events. There's lots and lots of different types to choose from. Now, fundraising events can bring in revenue from a lot of different sources. It can be through ticket sales. It can be through sponsorships of that event. You can ask for simple donations as part of the event as well. Now, events are usually a go-to fundraising strategy for a lot of organizations, but one thing that's really important to consider is the return on investment for those events. The thing with events is they take a really long time to plan, and depending on how big they are, can be very complex and sometimes expensive. I mean, imagine if you're having a fancy dinner, you might have to pay for a venue and tables and chair rentals, or audio-visual equipment, or an MC, and then of course there's the catering and the food, and the list could potentially go on. And you might think to yourself, well, I'll just get all that stuff donated. But I can tell you that's a little harder than it seems. And with event planning, the rule of thumb is you should be prepared to have to pay for everything and hope for a donation. Another thing is the most successful events are going to be held by organizations that already have a decent sized audience. That's because you need people to actually come to the event. So you need to have an audience to market the event to, knowing that only a small portion of your total audience is probably going to be available or interested in coming to that event at all. So spending the time in your fundraising strategy to build up an audience is a critical part to basically lay the groundwork for success for any of the 5 things that I've talked about. And one more thing about events, they can vary in success by organization size. Sometimes events are a really good choice for smaller or startup organizations because they're also a tool you can use to introduce new people to your cause and build a relationship and build community with those people. And sometimes they're also good for very large organizations because the prospect of having to spend money to put on the event is not as big of a deal for them because they have the money to invest in the first place. And they also might have a really large audience size. It's those middle-sized organizations that have to think really hard about their event strategy and if it's worth it to put on something fancy or if there are more cost-effective ways of raising money. Now, I will say virtual events have taken off in the past couple of years during the pandemic, and those can definitely cut down on some of those event overhead costs. But we also might see varying levels of audience engagement at those events. So if you're going to do a virtual event, just be thinking hard about how are you going to keep people entertained and building community and connecting emotionally to your cause through that platform. I bet you're wondering if I have another YouTube video that goes more into depth about events, and the answer is yes. Here it is, how to plan nonprofit fundraising events. I hope you enjoy. Okay, that's what I have today. What do you think? I hope that if there's one thing you got out of this video today, it's that fundraising is not a one-size-fits-all thing for nonprofits across the board. Every organization has to think through what the best fit is going to be for them. and really develop a strategy that makes sense for their community, their resources, their assets, etc. For some organizations, the earned income model might be the biggest way you bring in revenue. For others, it might be individual donations, and for yet others, it might be government contracts or grants. I'd love to hear, what do you think is the best method for your organization? What are some things you're interested in trying out? Definitely share in the comments below. And if you're starting a nonprofit or need resources to help you figure out how to build a sustainable fundraising plan, check out my website, foundertofulltime.com, where I have those trainings available, and hopefully they're helpful to you. If you're looking for other resources and funding opportunities and other opportunities to learn more about the social impact world, I have a newsletter that you can subscribe to. I will leave the link for that in the description below, so you can join that newsletter anytime and opt out anytime as well. Final thing, I have a group on Facebook called Change the World or Bust. We've got a couple thousand folks from around the world in there having good conversations about their own social impact and or nonprofit journeys, and I hope you can join me there. And that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.